Hello, check, check, check. Checking the room. Hello, this is Daniel from Sound Headquarters. Today we're going to be treating this vocal booth. As you can hear, it's very echoey and reverby in here. Here's how the room sounds after treatment. You can hear that there's way less echo, way less reverb. Way tighter of a room sound in here now. So here is our empty room, our empty vocal booth to start off with. I'm going to show you some shots of the walls and the ceiling here. We're going to be treating this with clouds in the next episode, but in this episode I'm going to show you the 6-foot acoustic panels that we did in a crushed black velvet, super cool look. And here's a view from the control room. And the first thing that we're doing is we're measuring for our placement of our hardware. The very first step was talking with the client, making sure that we had the right amount of panels, and we went over the placing and all of our fabrics and our sizing. That's all at the consultation stage. And once we have that all locked in, we can go ahead and start getting everything ready for our hardware. So right now I'm marking the center of this wall right here. And this wall is going to receive 5 acoustic panels. So that center mark is going to mark the center of our middle acoustic panel. So I always measure from both sides to make sure that I'm finding the true center, and then I'll center between both of those marks that I measured from both sides. You can see me doing that right here. And that's just to make sure that we're accounting for any kind of variance within either the structure of the room or the walls, the drywall, anything like that. So now I'm using the level to make sure my line is nice and straight and vertical, and I'm measuring down at my height. So we staggered these panels, which helps with getting a little bit more coverage of the surface area within the vocal booth. And this is us mounting the hardware. So we just line up our hardware, our flush mount hangers, with the T mark that we make with our pencil, and we just mark out for the holes that we need to drill. Now right here is where we found out that this wall, the drywall and the studs weren't thick enough. This is actually an exterior wall in the building, so we hit the concrete blocks, which is why the drill wasn't going anymore. So on this day, we didn't have the concrete drill, the impact or the hammer drill with us. So we just went ahead and got everything all marked out, and then we came back with the concrete drill. So you can pause right there. There was our marks. But basically what we're doing is if there's 5 panels, there's going to be 6 gaps. And we are just subtracting the width of our panels from the total length of the wall. And that gives us our gap. So in this case, it came out to 5.6 inches. And I just rounded that to 5.5 inches, and I started measuring those gaps off of my center panel. So you can see here I did the left panel, so our middle panel is at the high height, and then the ones to the left and the right are lower, and then the ones on the outer edges of the wall will be higher. So I'm just marking those out with our 5.5 inch gaps all around, and just repeating that same process for this wall. We measure the full length of the wall, and then we subtract our panels, and then if you have 2 panels, you're going to have 3 gaps. So we subtract our length of the total width of our panels from the total width of the wall, and then we're left with that number. We divide that by 3, and then we're left with our gaps for that small wall. So just going ahead, getting all of our hardware placements mocked up with the pencil before we start doing all of the drilling and mounting of the hardware, so that we can show the client and make sure that everything's on the right track before we actually start drilling and mounting these panels. So we did one custom panel for above their large vocal booth window here. So I'm just marking that out as well. And exact same process, just finding our middle mark and then centering that between the ceiling and the window casing. And doing the same for below this window. We did a 2-foot by 6-foot panel for below this window, and exact same thing, just finding the middle and marking. Now we did square panels for this rear door of the vocal booth, and we just did the exact same thing, just making sure that our spacings are the same and equal. So there's 2 panels there, and then there's going to be 2 more square panels for this upper portion of the wall. So these ones are getting centered to just the final width of the wall, rather than centered to that existing panel, because then the gap in the middle would have been too large. So we are just marking these ones and making sure the gap is still equal from top to bottom and left to right. So we'll measure our middle mark and base all of our measurements based off of our center marks. So you can see the level is very important here to make sure all of our hardware gets mounted in straight, because that will make sure that our panels hang level and we don't need to do a lot of adjusting once we're ready to hang the panels. So I'll use the hammer just to tap the hardware to make sure it's completely in line with our T marks that we made with our level before I secure it in finally with the impact driver. And these are all just drywall anchors until we get to this large wall with the 5 panels where we're going to use concrete anchors. And these are the concrete anchors I'm using right now. These are Cobra taps, 3/16 by 1 1/4. And it comes with the concrete bit and it comes with the impact driver. So you can see I'm using the hammer drill here to get into that masonry. And once we have our holes in our concrete, we only need those 2 anchors in. This rock solid, no pun intended. And I just did a 3rd one there just to help me with adjusting to get it level. And here's just a little time lapse from the control room angle of me getting the rest of these 5 mounts into this concrete wall here. And once those are up, all of our hardware for the panels is mounted in the vocal booth. So now we can go ahead and start building our panels. And we have our 2x2x8 lumber here, and you can see I'm sighting down the boards to make sure that there's no warps or kinks or any sort of crazy bends. And if there is, then we just either discard that wood or that wood goes towards making diffusers, which we'll do in a future video. So these panels are 6 feet by 2 feet. They're actually a few inches. They'll be 3 inches taller than 6 feet because of the actual width of the 2x2 here. But since these lengths of lumber are 8 feet long, this works out perfect because we can just do our cut mark at 2 feet and just cross-referencing here at 6 feet to make sure that that the board isn't either long or short by any degree, and just getting our marks there. And for every 2 of these pieces of 2x2 that we cut at 2 feet and 6 feet will represent 1 6-foot by 2-foot panel. So you can see just going ahead and getting that cut, and then I'll set all of these aside and I number them as well, just to make sure that if anything, if the wood falls or if it gets disorganized, that we know which pieces go with which panel. So yeah, just going ahead and getting all of our pieces cut here, and also getting our pieces cut for our square panels and for our 1 foot by 6 foot panel. So this job had 9 2-foot by 6-foot panels, 1 foot by 6-foot panel, and 4 of these 2-foot square frames, which I'm building right now. And you want to make sure that you have your long sides where they need to be and your sides that are 3 inches shorter to make your final dimension a 2-foot square. And we assemble these the same way that we assemble all of my panel frames. We do 2 pre-drills, and then we do 2 3-inch construction screws on each corner, and we use the ground as a guide so that when we run this frame on the router, our screws are not going to come in contact with the router blade, because that would be a big danger, and also you're going to ruin your router blade, and we don't want any of that or anyone getting hurt. So we keep our drill along the floor, and this gives us the right distance so that when we router that upper face, the face that is facing the floor right now, when we run that around the router table, it's not going to catch on any of the screws. And you can watch my previous videos for panel building as well. We have a few examples of us doing different size panel frames and the exact same method. Just 2 screws pre-drilled and drive the 3-inch construction screws in. And that's the 1-foot frame right there. So we've got all of our frames built, and here is the router. We're going to start getting that nice 45-degree chamfered edge on all of our panel frames. So we're starting with our 2-foot squares right here. Now the very first pass is more of a rough pass because it's taking off most of the mass of the wood, and it's not really going to leave you with that perfect finish. But that's why we do 2 passes for every single edge on our frames here. So first pass gets rid of the majority of the mass of the wood, and the second pass leaves us with a nice clean, totally flat finish. And in between each one, we just sight down the board and we just check to make sure there's no spots that are missing. And we're going to go ahead and get all of these frames routed. So here you can see this is the profile that 45-degree chamfer bit leaves on our frames. and it leaves that nice 45-degree edge, but you can see there's still a little bit of a lip, and there's still some marks from the router bit that we sand off so that none of those lips or edges catch when we upholster, when we stretch our fabric over these frames. And we're just using either 80 or 120 grit, whatever we have on hand, just to get that lip off of the frames. So there are our finished frames, totally routed and sanded, and now we're going to start on our rear upholstery. And this is just very simple. We're just using a black poly blend fabric here that's breathable, and we just staple to the rear of the frame, and this is what's going to hold in the acoustic insulation before we upholster the front face of the frame with our final fabric. And the front face, for this job, we're using a crushed black velvet. It's a really cool look you'll see once the panels start going up. So here is our ROCKWOOL COMFORTBOARD 80. This is the rigid acoustic insulation that's available for us here in the Toronto area in Canada. In the United States, you might use Owens Corning. There's other products that work well as well. It's all kind of regional to what is available for you and what suppliers supply to your area. So this is one 6-foot by 2-foot frame with our insulation inside, and that one is ready for upholstery. So here we've got Christian getting all of our panels ready with the insulation while I'm in the control room working on the final upholstery. And each of these 6-foot frames will use 1 1/2 pieces of the 2x4 foot insulation. So here you can see I'm just laying out my crushed black velvet face down and cutting that in half so that I can get 2 panels worth out of it. We secure our corners first with slight tension all around, and then we secure one long side, and then we tension across the other long side and staple. And here is a close-up detail shot of how I finish my corners. So this is a 4-way stretch fabric. I really recommend using a 4-way stretch because it makes the finishing a lot easier, and it's just way easier to work with. So I fold over the corner and I secure that with 2 to 3 staples, and now we're moving from the corner back to the center, and we are tensioning each time, making sure that the fabric is laying flat on the front face of the panel and that there's no fabric binding and there's no wrinkles. We just want to make sure that we do all the tugging and pulling and stapling on this rear side of the frame, because this will all be invisible. This will be against the wall. This won't be visible to the eye once the panel is finished. So you can see here just tensioning that corner and folding it down so it lays flat and stapling in place, and then working our way from the corner to the center of these short sides. And that's always how I upholster my panels. I do my long sides first all 4 corners, then the long sides, and then the short sides. And just securing that in there. And once everything is secured, then we can just use our scissors and trim off the excess fabric. And especially on these short sides, you want to make sure that your fabric is nicely trimmed, because this is where our mounting hardware will go. And if there's excess fabric hanging out, it can sometimes get caught in the flush mount hanger and just give you issues when you're trying to mount your panel. So you want to make sure that these short sides are trimmed really close to the staples. So just like that, doesn't need to be perfect, just needs to be so that the panel can lay flat against the wall. And there's our one finished panel. You can see that cool texture of the crushed black velvet there. So these are a really cool look. We've done these in multiple colors for a lot of clients, actually. This black crushed velvet's probably the most popular because it looks really cool. The light hits it from different angles, and it's just a cool vibe that people really seem to like inside their studios. So here we've got Christian getting these the hardware ready on these panels before we start to hang them. I believe I'm still in the control room working on the hardware at this point, but this was just a funny moment. Wanted to keep this in. Christian and I have a lot of good laughs on the job site. It's important that we enjoy what we do, and not to get too philosophical, but in this life you have to do what you love, and we love music. We both make music, and it's our passion that brought us into this. And there you go. Christian just dropped both screws. So funny. Oh yeah. Good times. Good times building studios. So Christian's going to go ahead and get all of those hardwares mounted into our panels so that they're ready to mount. And since these panels are 24 inches wide exactly, the center mark for these panels would be 12 inches. Our standard panels are just over 27 1/4 inches, which you'll see in our previous videos, our measurements for that. But for these particular panels, for this client, they are 2 feet wide is the final dimension. So our middle mark for where we need to mount our hardware is at 12 inches. So here you'll see a close-up shot of Christian mounting the hardware here. And we just use our measuring tape to line up our hardware with the center of the 12-inch mark. And we just get them all ready. And once the hardware is in, since all the hardware is in on the walls, these panels are ready to hang. And it's just as simple as hanging them on the hanger and then using the level to make sure that they are sitting straight. And here's one of the 2-foot panels here. And same deal, you can see that we just have our measuring tape marked at 12 inches there. And we line up our hardware and ready to mount. There we go. This one required a little bit of finessing. Sometimes when the flush mounts don't sit tight enough, you can hammer them or use your pliers to close the flush mount just by a little bit. And you'll see that you just bend it just enough so that it provides more friction and more grab on the actual hardware. And then you get better adjustability when you level your panels. So here we're leveling off that 1 foot by 6 foot panel for above the vocal booth window. Making sure it's all straight, everything looks all good. Now, sometimes in any room, in any construction, true level on your level, it might be completely level and straight, but if your window casing isn't level, for example, or if there's a door casing or there's something inside, you'll see it right here. So we got it completely level on the level, but just visually we could see that there was just that window casing just very slightly off. So in cases like that, we'll just level visually since it's such a very small difference anyways. So rather than driving anyone crazy when they look at the gaps visually and see that it's a little bit off, because we're not going to fix the window casing that's already installed. And for us to move the panel like a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch is not a big deal. So here's all of our panels installed in the room. And that is it for this episode. In the next episode, to complete the treatment of this vocal booth, we're going to be doing the ceiling clouds, the 4-inch broadband ceiling clouds. They act as bass traps as well within this vocal booth. Here's a sneak peek of the finished product with all of the gear and the clouds installed. We also did 3 mix position clouds in his control room as well. And you can see how the light hits these crushed black velvet panels. It's super cool. It's a really nice look. And you can hear from the beginning of the video the massive difference that this made in this room. Very cool. And you can see the clouds in the control room there as well. And here is a shot of the control room with our clouds installed. And this client wanted to go with a red solid velvet for the clouds, both in the vocal booth and in the control room. And then we have the black crushed velvet in the booth. Really cool look. Black and red, always a classic combination for studios. But at Sound Headquarters, we do all of our builds custom, one-off. We aim to make every single job unique, and we love doing custom work, doing cool fabrics, cool upholstery, custom trim, custom diffusers. We love doing stuff that's unique and really making a studio that feels like home and feels like an environment that you can create in and that you feel creative in. It's super important to us. And really hope that you enjoyed watching. Really hope that you learned something and you got something to take away to apply to your own home studio. My name is Daniel from Sound Headquarters Inc. You can reach me at email soundheadquartersinc@gmail.com. Instagram is sound.headquarters.inc. And my website is soundheadquarters.com. This was Daniel and Christian today on this job. So excited to show you next week when we do the clouds and we finish up this build, we tie it all up. And thank you once again so much for watching. This is Daniel from Sound Headquarters. Peace out.